All right, thanks, Ryan, and thanks everybody for logging on to listen to the work that we've been doing over the past few months. So I'm with Group 6, and all the members are listed there below. And our focus has really been on looking at academic institutions. And what we'd like to do and what we're going to talk about today is assessing the readiness for use-inspired research within academia. And that's academia broadly speaking. Next slide. Before the in-person workshop in Boise, we had these "wouldn't it be great if" statements. And our Group 6 or umbrella working Group 6 is a combination of two groups. It was a very productive meeting. What you see at the top of the slide are the titles that each of our groups came up with working individually. And within the Venn diagram are the short-term action items of each group. I'm not going to read the slide, but I do want to highlight some of the overlap in the next slide. Okay, there we go. So looking very broadly, the areas where we really felt like our two groups synergized and could agree in terms of trajectories that we collectively wanted to take was generally reaching out to stakeholders. So doing some form of outreach, getting a task force of some sort together. In this case, it was specifically government, but really the point is to get people together to reach out to the community to gain information. And before we do that, the first thing that we needed to do was create what we called a common language around use-inspired research, and more specifically, defining what it is that we mean when we say use-inspired research in academia. What does it mean? What doesn't it mean? That's going to be a recurring theme in this presentation. And then, again, in terms of something we both wanted to do was create a survey. And create a survey and with the goal of collecting this information around, broadly speaking, what use-inspired research is or would be. So if we got together, we looked at our short-term goals, and what came out of that was what you will see when someone in the background clicks next. There we go. Group 6 was formed. And so we were formed around this vision of, and this is a very grand vision of ultimately wanting to promote a culture of use-inspired research in academia. The operative word there is culture. Our general feeling, again, very high level thinking long-term, is that in the absence of some culture around use-inspired research, any attempts to get formal adoption and in place would be difficult to do. Next slide. So how do we propose doing this? Well, if you look at the traditional model within academia, you have some individual, in this case we have a faculty member, and there's inputs that go into making the enterprise work. You could have a workforce, in this case, and listed as students and postdocs. You could have investment in the form of startup with new hires, especially faculty new hires. And then there's grants and awards as well that sustain the research enterprise within academia. But beyond just these inputs, there's also this ongoing idea exchange that just happens organically within the system, where scientific colleagues get together and they talk science and they share ideas, and there's this exchange and things come out of that. And those outputs are things like presentations and publications. And those become really the primary metrics by which academic research is judged. If you have high impact, good quality publications, you're well presented, and your ideas are well received by the community, you go through a review, and then there's advancement through the system. So what isn't on this slide, but hopefully is maybe obvious to most of the people here, is that this entire structure can happen within the confines of the academic institution or the academic enterprise, broadly speaking. It doesn't have to just be within one, but generally these interactions can happen within and between academic institutions. So what we'd like to propose is what is on the next slide, where we, and the term that was used in our "wouldn't it be great if" was break down the walls of the ivory tower. And what we're essentially proposing is that in this system that is primarily academic, is that now we introduce within the structures of review and assessment that lead to advancement, engagement with the broader community. And so in this case, you could think about a user community, because we're talking about use-inspired research and use-inspired inquiry. And the way to really do use, and this is something that became abundantly clear to me at the end of the workshop, is the way that you do really good, high-quality use-inspired research is you got to get out of your office or your lab, and you have to go talk to the people that are ultimately going to use your technology or have needs that you could potentially address. You're only going to find that out by interacting with the users. So now in this structure, there is still this interaction within, say, in this case, we've used science because I'm a chemist, but scientific colleagues. But now integrated into this is there's this exchange with the broader user communities that are out there. And now we've introduced a whole new set of outputs: user benefits, economic and workforce development, prototypes, products, things of that nature that ultimately benefit our communities and our taxpayers at large. And then this ultimately feeds into the review, and we get advancement in the sense that we're used to within our academic institutions. Next slide. What's our plan? So our overarching goal ultimately is that we want to create a set of guiding principles versus rigid guidelines that can be implemented in an institution when considering how we reward performance and how that leads to advancement within academia, and that it explicitly integrates user engagement and informs institutions about what they need to do to be impactful in the context of use-inspired research. Questions that are going to guide us as we go is, are institutions ready for the future of NSF? What is NSF asking us to do today when we talk about use-inspired research? How does the faculty experience differ to what leadership says about the faculty experience? Those two things don't always jive. For example, what are faculty actually doing and what are they rewarded for? And again, what is and isn't meant by use-inspired research from the perspective of a faculty member? And next slide. So our next steps are, we want to clarify what use-inspired research is and isn't. So we want to create a definition for use-inspired research within the context of academia. Based on that definition, we want to create a survey and collect data on institutional readiness and how it relates to what NSF is asking us. Essentially, just how ready are institutions for what NSF is putting forward with this priority through TIP and through our conversations around use-inspired research. So we'll create a survey to do that, identify readiness and obstacles across institution types. There's going to be some institutions that are just more ready for this than others. And what can we learn from comparing the different across institutions? We'd like to begin working with R2s because, just broadly speaking, we feel like they're generally more nimble than R1s. See what principles we can extract and then apply, see how they can be applied to R1 institutions. Over the long term, we want to broaden the conversation and go and ask maybe similar questions of the communities based on their perspective of what it's like to engage with academia and how that relates to use-inspired research. Put a report together that would give to NSF, and then ultimately have this self-sustained cycle of bottom-up, top-down use-inspired research cycle. And next slide. So if you're interested, we are looking for folks to join our team. In particular, we would love to have 1 or 2 postdocs, or maybe a graduate student or 2 if there's sufficient interest, to actually have expertise in putting a survey like this together, but are also interested in doing the work to help make this happen, because what we're proposing here is probably more work than any one of us can do on our team. Ideally, we'd need to get funding for this postdoc, so we want to write this into a supplement. For example, anyone involved with a regional innovation engine or preparing an eCore or RERISE proposal and would like what we discussed briefly now, but we're happy to talk more offline and integrate that into part of their project, we'd love to talk to you. Again, postdocs or grad students that are interested, let's get together and talk, and we'll see what we can do. Anyone who has experience preparing a survey like what we discussed, we'd love to. We have expertise on our team, but the more the merrier. The greater non-academic community, love to get your perspective and have your experiences inform how we put our survey together. Like we said, we would like to focus on R2 institutions. So if there's members of an R2 out there that would love to be a part of this and take it back to their university, let's talk. And NSF, our doors are always open. If anyone at NSF who's interested in academic readiness around use-inspired research, and I imagine there's at least a couple, if what we talked about today intrigues you, we'd love to continue the discussion. And if you're looking at this list and going, I'm not sure where I fit, it really doesn't matter. We'll take anyone who is excited and passionate to work on what we've proposed. We'd love to have a conversation with you. So if you're interested, my email is there. Please contact me, and we welcome your feedback. Thank you.
So first question, I'm going to ask it in 2 parts. I actually got it from a couple different directions. You use the acronym UIR. Could you explain what that is? And then I know the answer to that, so I'm just going to ask the follow-up. What is it like? So the question was, how do you define use-inspired research? It's like what?
It's like, I honestly, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay.
What's use-inspired research like?
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, and this is sort of what I took away from the workshop in Boise, is use-inspired research is not fundamental research, and it's not applied research. It's something in the in-between. And I think that's critically important, because I think within our work, we tend to define ourselves as either fundamental scientists or applied, research scientists. Okay. And so it's somewhere in between that. I'm not going to call it a valley of death, because that's used way too often. But it's somewhere in that valley between what I would consider fundamental research and applied research, translation, commercialization. So we're not at the translation commercialization phase. We're not just doing fundamental science. What we're doing is we're trying to identify how our research, how the work within academia can address what the needs of the community are. So there is purpose to every research project that is out there. That's why it has funding. But through engagement with the community, it brings a relevance to the research, especially when we talk about our immediate communities, that I think could be a serious value add as you move through this trajectory from fundamental science to commercialization. So that's what it means for me, Brian.
Okay. What if faculty views differ from NSF's definition in funding calls?
I'm trying to see how to answer that in a politically correct way. I mean, I think NSF, it listens to faculty. NSF listens to researchers. If a faculty member's definition differs from what NSF's definition is, I imagine they would be open to conversation. I can say that whoever asked that question, if they would like to join our team, it would be great to have a discussion around what their definition of use-inspired research is, because I think, I mean, it goes sort of to the root of our project, where we're trying to identify what does use-inspired research mean within academics or within academia, and does it match what NSF's definition is? Is NSF's definition one that could be broadly adopted? And if not, we probably need to have a discussion.
Okay, time for one more quick one, about 30 seconds. Are there examples of colleges, universities that are already leading this shift?
Yes. You know, and I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, because I'm sort of stereotyping in a way, but you know, schools and units within universities that tend to do more applied research, where there's extensions, engineering schools, where people tend to create projects and ideas that are a little bit closer to the user, the end user, and spinning things out of universities, I would say are probably more prepared for what use-inspired research is. And, you know, again, we can debate that, and that's part of our project, versus more departments or institutions that do more fundamental type work. I think what's critically important, and this is for NSF as well to think about, is because of that, I'll call it a dichotomy, it's going to be easier for institutions that are already plugged into the industrial communities that are out there. And so, you know, larger institutions that are already well connected are probably going to have an easier time competing for funds that you know, require some form of engagement within communities. Other institutions that may not be as well plugged into having a broad industrial network, for example, might be disadvantaged in some way, but that should not count against them when they go up for funding. So in thinking about funding use-inspired research, I think it's important to make sure there's equitable thinking across institution types.